August 20th, 1966. A hill outside a Brazilian city. A boy with a kite discovers two bodies. Vintém Hill rises above the city of Niterói on the eastern shore of a wide bay. It is the kind of hill that would not ordinarily draw attention. Dense with grass and low vegetation, steep in certain sections, quiet in most others. In August 1966, a teenage boy brought his kite there on a Saturday afternoon, looking for wind. He found something else entirely. At first, he thought what he was seeing was refuse. Debris left by someone who had camped on the hill, or bags blown in by the coastal wind. He walked closer. He stopped. Two men were lying side by side in the grass. They were fully dressed in formal suits, and they were not moving. He ran down the hill. He found a policeman, and he told him what he had seen. Police attempted to respond immediately, but the terrain of Vintém Hill created an obstacle. The slope was steep and difficult to navigate, particularly in the summer heat, and the path to where the bodies lay was not easily accessible. A group of officers and firefighters set out to reach the site that day. They did not make it. They returned the following morning, and that was when the full picture of what had happened there began to emerge. The two men were lying parallel to one another, partially covered by tall grass that had grown over and around them in the days since they had died. They had not been moved. There was no sign that any animal or person had disturbed them. They appeared, in the words of one investigator who later described the scene, to have simply laid down, quietly and without struggle, as though choosing the moment themselves. Each man wore a formal suit. Over the suit, a matching waterproof raincoat. Their shoes were on. Their wallets were in their pockets, with cash still inside. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been disturbed. And over each pair of eyes, covering them completely, was a device the investigators had never encountered before. A mask, handmade, shaped from a sheet of lead, sealed against the face. Lead is dense, opaque, and heavy. It blocks light completely. These men had made their masks by hand. The masks were not crude. They had been cut with care, shaped to follow the contours of a face, designed to seal out everything. Light, radiation, any signal that might reach the eyes from an external source. They resembled nothing so much as industrial eye protection, the kind worn by welders or radiologists. But they had been made in someone's home workshop, by someone who knew exactly what they were building and why they were building it. Police secured the scene and collected everything they could find. Near the bodies, an empty water bottle and a small packet containing 2 wet towels, and a notebook. Inside, the notebook held page after page of numbers and part references, the ordinary notations of a working technician. But on one page, the writing changed. A set of instructions, deliberate and specific, unlike anything else in the book. The handwriting was calm and deliberate. The instructions had been followed exactly. The cause of death was unknown. Brazilian police had worked difficult cases before. They had seen violence, poverty, and desperation in all the forms those things take. But this was different. There was no violence here, no struggle, no desperation visible in any detail of the scene. Only calm, only deliberateness. Only 2 men who had come to this hillside with great intention and done something that no one at that moment could begin to explain. Their names were Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. Both were electronics technicians from a town called Campos dos Goitacazes, located several kilometers north of Rio de Janeiro. They had worked in the same trade for years, sharing professional knowledge, tools, and though it was less widely known, a set of deeper interests that would come to define the final period of their lives. Both men had families. Both were known in their community as reliable, thoughtful, and private individuals. Neighbours described them with the words used for people who do not attract attention: careful, competent, present. They showed up to their work. They maintained their households. Anyone who knew them only through the surface of daily life would have struggled to imagine their names appearing in newspaper reports that eventually reached several countries. They were not strangers to the world. They had people who would miss them. And they had a secret. Beyond their technical work, both men had a deep and serious interest in what they and their circle called scientific spiritualism. This was not a passing curiosity or a casual side interest. For Manoel and Miguel, it was a discipline, one they had studied, practiced, and invested real material resources in pursuing. It occupied a central position in their private lives in a way that the people around them may have only partially understood. Scientific spiritualism, as practiced by this particular group, was an attempt to bring empirical methodology to the belief that consciousness, human or otherwise, could be contacted across distances that conventional science would describe as impossible. Its practitioners held that spirits, both living and deceased, and beings from other worlds, all operated on detectable frequencies. They were not simply waiting for signs, they were actively building equipment to find those frequencies and tune into them. The group attracted people with technical backgrounds, those who worked daily with concepts of signal and noise, transmission and reception. Electronics workers, radio operators, repair technicians found the framework natural. To these practitioners, the spirit world was not a supernatural realm beyond measurement. It was an extension of the electromagnetic landscape they already inhabited professionally. They believed it could be reached. They believed it was only a matter of finding the right instrument and the right conditions. This framing matters because it shapes everything that came after. Manoel and Miguel were not men who had lost their grip on reality. They were not invisible distress. They were methodical people who held a set of beliefs that their specific community considered grounded in observable principles. Whatever happened on that hill was not random. It was the result of sustained and deliberate preparation, carried out by two people who fully expected it to work. They had been planning something, and weeks before August 17th, they had already tried and failed once. A friend named Elcio Gomez had known both men for some time. He was part of the same community of people who approached spiritual contact as a practical challenge. After the deaths, when police began their investigation, Gomez agreed to speak with them. He told them about a device the three of them had built together in his garden, assembled from technical components in the weeks before the events on Vintém Hill. The device was intended to facilitate contact with beings they believed resided on a nearby planet. They had assembled it from materials familiar to them from their technical work. They powered it on. It exploded, violently enough to draw attention from those nearby. No one was injured, but the experiment had clearly failed. Manoel and Miguel were undeterred. The theory they maintained remained sound. The device had simply not been right. On August 17, 1966, both men left their homes. They did not tell their families where they were really going. Manoel told his family he was travelling to purchase equipment for work. Miguel said the same. It was a plausible story. Technicians regularly travelled to source parts and tools from suppliers in larger cities. Their families had no reason to question it. They said goodbye and left. No member of either family would see them alive again. Investigators later reconstructed the men's actual route from receipts and witness accounts. They had not gone where they said they were going. They had taken a bus toward Niterói, a coastal city across the bay from Rio de Janeiro. They arrived there at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. From the bus stop, both men moved through the city with clear purpose, making a small number of specific stops before heading toward the hill. At a local shop, both men purchased identical waterproof coats. The purchase was not impulsive. The coats were practical for someone who intended to sit or lie on damp ground for an extended period. The season brought frequent rain. They knew they would be outside. They had prepared for that, the way prepared people prepare for known conditions, as if they were packing for an assignment they had already studied thoroughly. Their last confirmed sighting was at a bar near the base of Vintém Hill. A waitress took their order. She served them water. When investigators spoke with her afterward, she remembered the visit clearly. One of the men had seemed agitated. Not aggressive, not unusual in any dramatic way. He was polite and orderly. but he was nervous. And he kept checking his watch, repeatedly, as if tracking something, as if time itself were the variable that mattered most in that moment. The other man said little. They paid and left. The instructions in the notebook had specified hours 16:30. Be at the agreed location, 18:30. Ingest capsules. The men were at the bar in the early afternoon. The hill was close. They were not wandering. They were orienting themselves in time, calculating the gap between where they were and where they needed to be, the way a technician calculates the gap between a current state and a required one. From the bar, the men's movements become less certain. Witnesses later told investigators they had seen two men fitting the description of Manuel and Miguel accepting a ride from two strangers in a vehicle, heading toward the upper part of the hill. Those two strangers were never identified. Police made inquiries. No one came forward. Whether those men understood what they were driving the technicians toward remains one of the quieter unanswered questions at the edge of the case. After that, the record goes quiet. No one else saw Manuel and Miguel on the hill. No one reported hearing anything in the area that evening that could be definitively connected to them. The hill simply continued being the hill, steep and grass-covered and unremarkable, while the two men ascended it and made their way to the spot where 3 days later a boy with a kite would find them still lying. 3 days passed. The hill was quiet. Their families had begun to wonder where they were. The notebook recovered from the scene has been studied in the decades since by investigators, journalists, researchers and people who have never been able to let the case go. Most of its contents are mundane. Component lists, technical shorthand, the accumulated notations of working professionals. But that one page stands apart. It reads as a protocol, a sequence of actions to be performed in a specific order, at a specific time, in a specific location. The full instructions, as recorded by police, read as follows: be at the specified location at 16:30. At 18:30, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal mask. Each phrase appears intentional. The hour of arrival. The hour of ingestion. The instruction to protect metals. A phrase that every investigator who reviewed the case found impossible to interpret with confidence. And finally, await signal mask. Wait for the signal, while wearing the mask. What signal? From whom? By what means was it supposed to arrive? The instructions provide no answer. They assume a shared understanding. The kind of understanding that exists between people who have discussed the same subject many times, who have a common frame of reference for what the signal means and what form it takes. These men were not improvising. They were following a plan that had already been written and agreed upon by people who expected to understand it. The phrase protect metals has never been explained. No investigator who reviewed the case ever offered a credible interpretation. The masks offered something closer to an answer. Not for what killed the men, but for what they expected to encounter. Lead is used as radiation shielding in medical and industrial settings. It is opaque to virtually every wavelength of light and radiation. A person who expected to be exposed to an overwhelming burst of light or energy, an event intense enough to damage unprotected eyes, might reasonably reach for lead as a solution. It was the material they worked with professionally. It was what they had. Police found the answer to how the masks were made at Miguel's home workshop. On a workbench, lead scraps of the same dimensions as the masks, cutting tools, materials used for shaping and fitting metal. The workshop was the space of a careful craftsman, organised, purposeful. The masks had been cut cleanly, shaped by hand, fitted with attention to detail. They had not been made in a hurry. They had been made over time, with intention, by someone who planned to use them. Also found in the workshop, a book on the practice of scientific spiritualism, apparently studied by both men. Inside it, certain passages had been marked. The highlighted sections describe the nature of contact between human beings and extraterrestrial entities. contact that according to the text would be heralded by an intense luminosity. A light so powerful, the book warned, that it could damage human vision without protection. The recommended protection, according to what they had read and highlighted, was a shield made of lead. They had read that they would need protection from the light, so they made themselves protection from the light. The autopsy, when it finally happened, resolved nothing. The coroner's office was overwhelmed at the time, and the examination of the two men was delayed for weeks. By the time the procedure was conducted, the organs of both men had decomposed to a degree that made reliable toxicological analysis impossible. The capsules the notebook had instructed them to ingest, whatever they were, whatever they contained, had left no detectable trace in the tissue that remained. There were no wounds, no contusions or marks suggesting impact, no indicators of a cardiovascular event, no signs, in any form, of physical violence. The official cause of death for both men was recorded as unknown. That designation has never been updated, never revised, never supplemented by a subsequent finding. More than half a century of forensic advancement has not produced a single piece of evidence that changes what was written in those original records. The physical evidence, the lead masks, the notebook, the waterproof coats, was catalogued and stored. Investigators preserved everything expecting that the case might yet be resolved. Some of those items remain in official storage today. The masks specifically have been photographed extensively. They are the most identifiable artifacts of the case, and the only physical objects that carry the direct imprint of whatever the two men believed they were about to experience on that hill. Every piece of evidence pointed to deliberate action. None of it revealed the cause of their deaths. The picture that emerged from the investigation was of a small but organised community that had been active in the region for some time. Scientific spiritualists had drawn their membership primarily from the local technical workforce. People who worked daily with electronics, signal-based equipment, and the principles of electromagnetic transmission. The group had no official registry, no public address, but they had shared beliefs, shared methods, and shared ambitions that had been developing over a period of years in workshops and gardens and small rooms. Elcio Gomez described the group's core theory in some detail. The central belief was that consciousness, whether belonging to a living person, a deceased spirit, or a being from another world, exists on a detectable frequency. The same principle that allows a radio receiver to isolate a transmission from the chaos of the electromagnetic spectrum could, they believed, be applied to make contact with non-human intelligences. The method was technical. The goal was contact. They believed they were close. The group had apparently focused their efforts on the possibility of contact with beings they believed resided on a nearby planet. This was not intended as metaphor. They believed, in a literal and technical sense, that such contact was achievable. That the right equipment, combined with the right prepared state, would allow a human being to bridge a distance that no conventional instrument had ever spanned. They had attempted it once in the garden. They were prepared to attempt it again, differently, on the hill. The device exploded in the garden. The experiment failed. And yet, weeks later, two of them returned to try again. Gomez told police that the failure had not shaken the group's conviction. If anything, the explosion had seemed to confirm that they were working with forces that were real and consequential, that the device had been incorrectly configured, not that the underlying theory was wrong. Whatever Manoel and Miguel brought to Vintém Hill that August, it was not a failed experiment repeated blindly. It was a deliberate iteration, a revised attempt carried out by people who believed they had learned something from what had gone wrong before. Gomez was asked why he had not gone with them on August 17th. He could not account for it precisely. He had simply not gone. Whether he was afraid, or whether the timing had not aligned for him, or whether some other consideration had kept him back. The record does not say. He survived. They did not. The gap between the man who stayed and the two who climbed the hill has never been fully explained, and it is one of the quieter mysteries that sit at the edge of the case without ever announcing themselves. Other witnesses came forward in the weeks after the bodies were found. Several people living near Vintém Hill reported that on the evening of August 17th, the night Manoel and Miguel are presumed to have made their ascent, they had observed unusual lights near the hilltop. Descriptions varied. Some said orange, some blue. Some described an oval shape hovering above the slope. One person reported hearing a sudden sound, sharp, brief. Police logged all of these accounts formally. Police could neither verify the witness accounts nor dismiss them. The statements came from multiple people in different positions around the hill, with no apparent coordination between them. Whether they were describing a genuine event, a misidentified natural light source, or a collective response to the knowledge that something unusual had happened there was no way to determine. The investigation noted the accounts and moved on, as investigations must when the evidence they hold cannot take them further. A year after the deaths, an investigative report surfaced a detail that had stayed hidden. It changed everything. A researcher who had gathered accounts from local newspapers and investigators came across a reference to an earlier death. 4 years before Manuel Miguel died on Vintém Hill, a third electronics technician had been found dead on a different hill in the same region of Brazil. He too had been wearing a lead mask. The specifics of that earlier case. The man's name, the details of any investigation, the official determination of cause, were never fully made public. The reference was brief. The implication was not. If that account was accurate, and the researchers who found it believed it was, then whatever Manuel and Miguel had attempted on Vintém Hill was not something they had invented. It was something passed to them, something inherited from a community that had already tried and already paid, something that had already claimed at least one life before theirs. They could have known this. They climbed the hill regardless. They put on their masks. They waited for the signal. The theory that attracted the most sustained attention from investigators was a relatively direct one: the notebook reference capsules. A figure associated with the spiritualist community published a statement in a newspaper some weeks after the deaths, suggesting that members of such groups would sometimes consume psychedelic compounds as part of their contact rituals. His interpretation: Manuel and Miguel had taken a substance, lost consciousness, and died of an accidental overdose. Alone on a wet hillside, wearing their lead shields, waiting for a light that never arrived. There is a particular quality to that image. Two men who had prepared carefully, who had followed the schedule precisely, who had arrived on time and done exactly what the notebook said. Lying quietly in the rain, already gone with their eyes protected from a light they never lived to see. It is not a violent picture. It is, in its way, almost peaceful. And that, perhaps, is what makes it so difficult to simply look away from, and so impossible to fully put down. No drug was ever confirmed, no device was ever found, no third party ever came forward to say what happened. The investigation eventually went quiet. Police had gathered what they could. Without confirmed toxicology, without a device, without a surviving witness who could speak directly to what the men had planned, there was no path forward that led to a conclusion. The case was never formally closed. It was never officially ruled a suicide. It was never attributed to any identified cause. It simply remained where it had always been. Open, unanswered, and accumulating years with a stillness that matched the hill itself. In subsequent years, the case drew journalists, documentary filmmakers, researchers interested in the boundary between technical practice and belief, and people who simply could not stop thinking about what those two men had expected to find. The case appeared in newspapers, in books, on early internet forums, and in television programs. Each new account offered some new framing or detail, but none provided the answer that every version of the story was, in its way, reaching toward. Decades later, a Brazilian television program revisited the evidence, gathering surviving accounts and attempting to reconstruct the timeline with the advantage of additional time and resources. What they found confirmed the essential strangeness of the case without resolving it. The lead masks, the notebook, the lights reported by witnesses. All of it remained as it had been in 1966, documented, catalogued, preserved in official storage, and fundamentally unexplained. The phrase "await signal mask" has attracted particular attention from those who have studied the case carefully. If the lead covering was protection against an expected light source, what was the signal it marked? Was it the beginning of the contact event? The first overwhelming moment of luminosity? The instruction assumes an existing shared understanding. It assumes whoever received it would already know what form the signal took and what to do when it arrived. No one with that understanding has ever spoken about it publicly. Among those who have examined the case carefully, a recurring observation concerns the composed posture of the bodies. People who die in sudden distress do not typically arrange themselves with care. People who are frightened run, or curl inward, or reach for something nearby. Manoel and Miguel did none of those things. They lay quietly, beside each other, as though they had chosen the moment and the manner, as though whatever came, they had expected it and they were not afraid. They were ready for something. Whatever it was, it did not leave them alive to describe it. Vintém Hill remains accessible. The specific slope where the bodies were found carries no marker, no plaque, no sign, no acknowledgement that anything happened there. The vegetation has grown and changed with the decades. The city below has expanded. Generations have passed through Niterói who have never heard the names of the two men who climbed the hill one August evening and did not come back. The place holds the memory only for those who know to look for it. The families of both men buried them without knowing why. They received no satisfying explanation. No confirmation of what the men had taken, no account of what they had believed they were doing or how it had ended. The question of whether Manoel and Miguel had understood the risk, whether they had accepted the possibility of not returning, was never addressed in any official document. It is a private uncertainty, held now only by those who loved them, if any of those people are still living. If there were other members of the group, people who shared the same beliefs, who had received the same instructions, who had perhaps stood on other hills on other nights and survived whatever Manoel and Miguel did not, none of them ever identified themselves to investigators. If the community continued after the deaths, it did so without any public trace. The scientific spiritualists of that time and place simply receded from the record, as quietly as the two men had left their city for the last time. The lead mask case sits at an unusual intersection. It is not a disappearance. The men were found. It is not a confirmed murder. There is no identified perpetrator and no physical evidence of violence. It is not a classified suicide. There was no note of farewell and no clear indication that death was the intended outcome of what they were doing. It is two people who died under circumstances that have not been explained in a manner that has not been duplicated, at least not in any record that is publicly available. Some mysteries end, some simply grow quieter with time. The lead mask's case grew quiet and has never spoken again. What stays with most people who learn this case is not the strangeness of the masks, or the cryptic instructions, or even the lights that witnesses described above the hill. It is the ordinary quality of the two men at the centre of it. They had jobs, they had households, they had families who expected them home, they were technical, capable, experienced professionals, and they chose, with full deliberateness, to climb a hill one August evening and follow a set of instructions to the end. Whatever they believed was going to happen, a contact, a light, an encounter with something beyond the ordinary reach of human experience, they believed it completely. Completely enough to lie to their families. Completely enough to purchase matching raincoats and spend the time to craft lead shields by hand. Completely enough to take a bus to a city they claimed not to be visiting, to arrive on schedule and to wait. That is the weight of the case. They went willingly. They were waiting for something they were certain was coming. The lead masks remain in storage. The notebook remains in an archive file. The hill remains above the bay, above the city, unchanged in its basic geography. The cause of death remains unknown. And the signal that Manoel and Miguel were waiting for, whatever it was, whatever form it was supposed to take when it finally came, has never been identified by anyone who was not lying in that same grass that August, wearing lead over their eyes, waiting. If this story has stayed with you, the masks, the notebook, the hill, the silence that has lasted since 1966, leave a comment below. Tell us which part of it you cannot stop thinking about. Or name another case you believe deserves this kind of quiet attention. There are more stories like this one. Mysteries that have never found the right audience. This channel exists to find them, and to stay with them as long as they deserve. The masks still exist. The hill still stands. And the signal they waited for has never been explained.